They say burnout happens slowly, like a leak in a pipe you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. That's how it was for me. My name is Marina Torres. I'm 31 years old. I live in Albuquerque now, in a tiny studio apartment above a ceramics shop that always smells like burnt clay and peppermint oil. Back then, I was an aerospace engineer. Not just any engineer, I was leading a Mars propulsion project for the ESA subcontractors, helping to design the thrust vectoring system that might one day land humans on the Red Planet. It was the kind of job you brag about at holiday dinners, the kind that makes your high school chemistry teacher tear up when they read your name in an article. And I walked away from it. Not with a big announcement, not in a blaze of defiant glory. I just stopped going. I drafted a resignation letter with all the usual excuses, personal growth, pursuing new passions, but the truth was simpler and harder. I was empty, not tired, not stressed, just hollow. No one knew how bad it got. I kept the panic attacks quiet, the nights lying on the bathroom floor because the light hurt my eyes. I stopped answering my sister Clara's texts, stopped returning my dad's calls. When I finally quit, my mom's first question was, "What happened? Did they fire you?" I told her no. She didn't believe me. Maybe she still doesn't. They made up their own story, I think. Maybe something scandalous. Maybe they tell people I burned out, sure, but in the way people say it when they mean failure. I was the star once, the family's pride. Now Clara has that role. She's a pediatric surgeon in Chicago, always smiling in the Facebook pictures, always on the holiday group texts. When people toast a family, they raise their glasses to her. No one toasts to the sister who quit. These days, I fix electric bikes. There's a little community shop on the edge of downtown, rusted-out roll-up door, big fan in the ceiling that rattles when it's humid. I do repairs and teach workshops for older folks who want to learn. It's called Maker Mondays. Mostly retirees trying to figure out how to keep their scooters running or tune their e-bikes without getting zapped. It's small work, but it's mine. Sometimes people ask me if I miss it being the prestige, the paycheck, the whole world I left behind. I used to say no. Now I say, sometimes. And that's the truth. Sometimes I do miss it. But I don't miss who I became trying to keep it. The studio I live in is small enough that I can touch the stove from my bed. The radiator makes a sound like a dying cat. But I can breathe here. I can think. I can be something other than the girl who used to be great. The thing no one tells you is that when you fall, people don't reach for you. They look away. But sometimes, falling is the only way you learn how to land. The first time I met Mrs. Wilkins, she nearly ran over my foot with a three-wheeled rust bucket of an electric trike. "Sorry, honey," she called, laughing as she skidded to a stop in front of the workshop. Her hair was cotton white and frizzy, poking out from under a baseball cap that read "Don't honk, I'm pedaling." "It's been dying on me every third ride," she said, patting the trike like it was a moody cat. "You think you can do something with it?" I told her I'd take a look. She showed up every day after that, sometimes just to watch, sometimes to talk. Mrs. Wilkins had been a school bus driver for 32 years. She had 5 grandkids, a penchant for cherry hard candy, and a knee replacement that beeped at the airport. Fixing her trike turned into a project: new motor coil, rewired throttle, reinforced front fork. 3 weeks in, I told her to hop on and test it. She rolled a few feet, then a few more, and then made a slow, wide turn through the parking lot. I could tell the exact moment she realized it was working. Her posture shifted, spine a little straighter, a grin tugging at her lips. When she came back, she was crying. "I can ride to the park again," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "I can go see them play." You don't know what that means. But I did. I really did. That was the first time I felt it again, that old flicker I hadn't felt since my engineering days. It wasn't about thrust or velocity vectors or orbit algorithms. It was simpler than that. Real. A human life made easier because of something I built with my own hands. Word spread, as it does. First it was Mr. Arnold from down the street with a busted power scooter. Then it was Loretta, who wanted to convert her walker to electric but couldn't afford a new model. I started offering weekend repair sessions just for seniors. They brought pie, stories, photos. Sometimes they didn't even need help, they just came for the company. Someone suggested a name. GEARGRANNY, they said, half joking. I laughed. But it stuck. I filed the nonprofit paperwork 6 months later. The idea was simple: mobile repair vans that traveled to low-income neighborhoods, fixing mobility devices for older adults and teaching them how to maintain them. We added free STEM classes too: basic electronics, 3D printing, how to solder a loose wire. Some folks came just to learn how to plug in a USB drive. Others ended up rebuilding entire wheelchair joysticks. We got a write-up in the local paper, then a city grant, then a small wave of volunteers, retired engineers, college kids, bike mechanics. We hosted our first Fix-It fair at a community center in the South Valley. 112 attendees, 200 devices repaired. It was working. It was really working. Except, not according to my family. When I called Clara to share the news about our first grant, she said, "That's great, Marina. Sounds like your bike tinkering thing is really taking off." Like I was a hobbyist in a garage instead of the founder of a fully registered 501(c)(3, with 3 mobile vans and a quarterly operating budget. At Christmas, my mom asked if I was still doing that little electric thing. My dad nodded, chewing turkey. "Good to stay busy," he said. Busy. That's what they called it. Sometimes I imagined what they would have said if Clara had started a nonprofit. There'd be a champagne toast, a post on Facebook, probably a framed article on the fridge. But that kind of applause wasn't coming. Not for me. Not for GEARGRANNY. Still, I kept going. Because while they saw a hobby, I saw Mrs. Wilkins pedaling toward her grandkids. I saw Ramon modifying his wife's walker so she could carry groceries again. I saw dignity being restored, not in some lofty, abstract way, but in battery packs and solder joints and smooth rolling tires. This was my life now. Not the one I thought I'd have, not the one they celebrated, but the one that mattered. And slowly, quietly, it was catching fire. I didn't even know the city newsletter had published a piece about GEARGRANNY until Bernice from the workshop came in waving a printed copy. "Page 4, she said, beaming. Right next to the article about the new dog park. There it was, a color photo of me kneeling beside a wheelchair, wrench in hand, a little grease smudge on my cheek. The headline read "Mobility in Motion, How One Woman's Garage Project is Changing Senior Lives in Albuquerque." They got most of the facts right. The quotes were decent. I cringed at the part where they called me a quiet innovator, but it was fine. Better than fine, actually. I brought it to dinner the following Sunday at my parents' house, thinking maybe, just maybe, it would spark something. Pride, curiosity, anything. Clara was already there, in full surgeon glam mode. Fresh blowout, perfect nails, gold stethoscope necklace. She and Mom were discussing wedding venues in Chicago, some garden space with twinkling lights and a harp player. I placed the newsletter on the table. Nobody looked up. "Oh," Mom said eventually, glancing at it. "That's cute, honey. You made the paper." Clara didn't even turn her head. "At least you're keeping busy," she said, sipping her wine. I slid the paper back into my bag. I should have known better. I should have expected the brush off. It was always like that. Anything I did was just filler. Something to tide me over until I figured my life out. Still, it stung. More than I wanted to admit. That night, I was back at the studio, halfway through reheating some lentil soup, when I saw an unfamiliar email pop up in the GEARGRANNY inbox. Subject line, "Thank you from Adriana, Clara's fiancée." My stomach did a weird lurch. I almost didn't open it. Then I did. It wasn't a long message. Just a few paragraphs, written in a warm, earnest tone. She explained that her grandmother, Teresa, had been mostly housebound for years after a stroke. Her chair worked, technically, Adriana wrote, but it was slow and unstable and terrifying to use outside. She was starting to give up. Then, one of our mobile repair vans showed up. She'd heard about us from a neighbor and scheduled a visit. One of our volunteers installed a new joystick and upgraded the motor system with better torque. They even added a custom gardening tray. "She can water her roses again," Adriana wrote. "She hasn't smiled this much in a decade." I don't know who's behind GEARGRANNY, but whoever you are, thank you. You've changed her life. There was a short video attached. I clicked it. It opened with a shot of a backyard garden, raised beds, trellises, colorful blooms everywhere. Then the camera panned to Teresa, steering her upgraded chair along the path. She was laughing, her hands guiding the joystick like it was second nature. "I can chase the damn rabbits out again," she yelled off-screen. Adriana chuckled. "Okay, Grandma, say hi." Teresa looked up. "Hi, stranger," she said. "Thanks for fixing my wheels." I sat there, the soup forgotten, the laptop humming in the quiet. Adriana had no idea that I was the one she was thanking. No idea that the founder of GEARGRANNY was also the sister her fiancé politely tolerated during family holidays. But she meant every word. That video, it was better than the newsletter. Better than any applause my family had never given me. It was real. I didn't reply right away. I didn't even forward it to my team. I just saved it to a flash drive and tucked it into my coat pocket. Later, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, thinking about all the ways we measure worth. Titles, salaries, degrees. Applause. But sometimes, your worth speaks for itself. In gardens. In grins. In people who thank you without knowing your name. My family didn't see me. But someone else did. And that mattered more than I ever expected. Clara's engagement brunch was the kind of event you had to dress for like it was a job interview you didn't want, at a company you didn't respect. White linen, rooftop patio, soft jazz trio. The kind of place where servers correct you if you pronounce croissant like an American. The group text had gone off days earlier, full of champagne emojis and exclamation points. I was silent in it. Then Mom sent a separate message. Please wear something soft. Nothing mechanical looking this time. That was her way of saying, don't show up looking like a grease monkey. Not hi, how are you, not excited to see you. Just a reminder that my clothes were a threat to the aesthetic. I almost didn't go. I had half a mind to skip it entirely. But something about that video of Adriana's grandmother stayed with me. I hadn't shared it with anyone. I'd saved it to a USB, told myself I'd show the team someday. But mostly, I just carried it. Like proof. Like armor. That morning, before the brunch, I had coffee with Lacey, my new intern from the community college. We were meeting a woman about a grant proposal for STEM classes targeting elder women in rural areas. Lacey had all the energy I used to have at 21. Eager, sharp, still believing that big ideas spoke for themselves. We were halfway through our lattes when a woman at the next table leaned over. Probably late 50s, bright purple glasses, smile full of apology. Excuse me, she said, looking at me. I don't mean to interrupt, but are you Marina? From GEARGRANNY? I blinked. Yeah. She clutched her chest. Oh my gosh. I've been wanting to thank you. My dad, Walter, maybe you remember him, he's the one you taught to fix the joystick on his electric wheelchair last summer. I did remember Walter. Sweet guy. Terrified of short circuits. Wore bow ties to every workshop. He fixed it himself last week, she said, her voice catching. It stopped working, and I thought he was going to panic. But he said, nope, Marina taught me what to do. And he did it. All by himself. I didn't know what to say. People didn't usually stop me in public. They didn't usually say those things. Thank you, she said, for seeing people, you know? And just like that, she was gone. Back to her seat. Back to her coffee and book. Lacey stared at me, wide-eyed. That happens to you a lot? I laughed. No, that's a first. I went home to change after that. Found a long navy dress I hadn't worn since my cousin's baby shower. Nothing mechanical looking, just a few faint solder marks on the hem if you looked close. I tucked the USB drive with Adriana's video into my bag. I told myself I was bringing it for no reason. Just to have it. Just in case. The brunch was every bit as curated as I expected. Adriana greeted me with a warm hug, genuine, bright-eyed, still somehow unaware of the chain link between us. Clara barely glanced up from the gift table. My parents nodded like I was someone they vaguely recognized from jury duty. I found a seat near the end of the table, the shaded end, far from the toasts and laughter and centerpieces. And honestly, I didn't mind. Because that morning, a stranger had thanked me for changing her father's life. Because last week, a woman I barely knew sent me a video of her grandmother reclaiming her joy. Because people were starting to see me not for who I was, but for what I built. So I sat at that table, in my navy dress with the tiny solder stains, clutching a USB I had no plan to use, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Seen. Not by everyone, but by enough. The eggs were cold by the time Adriana stood up to toast. Everyone had been sipping their mimosas in that slow, performative way rich people do, like every bite and every word might be catalogued for a future memoir. Adriana smiled at the group, her arm gently looped through Clara's. Thank you all for being here, she said. We're so grateful to celebrate with the people who mean the most to us. There were polite nods, clinks of cutlery. Clara's old med school friends beamed at each other like they'd invented brunch. I sat at the far end of the long table, behind a column of flowers that smelled like dish soap and privilege. Nobody was looking at me. When the toasts ended, people returned to their avocado somethings. I was quietly scraping hollandaise off my toast when Adriana walked over and pulled up the chair beside me. I feel like we barely know each other, she said, smiling. You're Clara's sister, right? It took everything in me not to laugh. Yeah, I said. I am. So what do you do? She asked, folding her napkin like someone who'd been raised to have the right kind of curiosity. I hesitated for half a second. Part of me wanted to say something vague, community work, education, repair stuff. Keep it simple. Keep it quiet. But something about the way Adriana looked at me, open, sincere, made me tell the truth. I run a nonprofit called GEARGRANNY, I said. We do mobile repair and STEM classes for older adults. Mostly electric mobility devices. It started small but we're in 5 districts now. Got a few vans. About 30 volunteers. Her eyebrows lifted. Wait, GEARGRANNY? That's you? I blinked. Yeah. Why? She looked like someone had just flipped on a spotlight. Oh my God. My grandmother, Teresa, your team helped her last spring. You modified her electric chair so she could get back into her garden. I sent a video. I saw it, I said quietly. She blinked. That was you? I had no idea. And then, Adriana did something I didn't expect. She turned to the table, raised her voice just slightly, just enough to rise above the low buzz of conversation. Hey, Clara, she said. Did you know your sister is the founder of GEARGRANNY? Clara looked up from her mimosa, confused. What? GEARGRANNY, Adriana said, clearly excited. The elder mobility nonprofit that's all over the city newsletters. Marina's the one who started it. Clara blinked. Wait, what? You didn't know? Adriana said, laughing gently. Your sister helped my grandmother get her life back. Like, literally. She was trapped inside for 2 years until your sister's team fixed her chair. Clara's face froze. She looked at me, really looked, for maybe the first time in 5 years. Everyone else quieted down. The table, once filled with fork clinks and laughter, fell into this awkward, sticky silence. You never told me, Clara said. I shrugged. You never asked. My voice wasn't bitter. Just, true. Mom dropped her spoon. Dad cleared his throat like he was about to say something, but didn't. A server approached with a tray of refill glasses, glanced around at the sudden tension, and backed away like a cartoon character. Adriana looked between us, confused. Wait, you didn't know she ran GEARGRANNY? Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, the right words didn't arrive. I leaned back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just relief. Because the silence was no longer mine to carry. It belonged to all of them now. The ones who never asked. The ones who smiled when I left the room. The ones who toasted only to what they could understand. And all it took was one person with open eyes to knock their whole version of me off its pedestal. I looked at Adriana and smiled. Thanks for the toast, I said. And I meant it. It started with a single message, right before midnight. Clara's husband, Greg, of all people, the most neutral man alive, never said more than nice to see you or how's the weather down there, in his Midwest dad voice. His text said, I had no idea. What you've built is amazing. I'm sorry we never saw it. I stared at the screen in the dark, the soft hum of my desk fan the only sound in the room. For a second, I didn't know how to feel. Greg's apology wasn't grand, but it was the first honest recognition I'd ever gotten from any of them. Then came the missed call from Mom. I didn't answer. The next morning, I left the studio early and drove out past the edges of the city. Just kept going until the road turned dusty and the desert stretched out like a held breath. I parked near one of those old hiking spots we used to visit when we were kids. The trail was overgrown. The air smelled like sage and something scorched. I walked for a while, no destination, just movement. Boots crunching over gravel. Sun on my back. That old restlessness trying to pick a fight in my chest. I sat on a ridge overlooking nothing in particular. Just scrub and dry wind and a hawk circling way off in the distance. I wasn't thinking about my family. Not really. I wasn't playing old arguments in my head or planning some future confrontation. I just sat. And let myself feel something quieter than I'd known in years. Peace. Not the kind you get from winning. Not the moment after you clap back or prove them wrong. But something softer. Like exhaling after holding your breath too long. They saw me now, maybe, but it didn't matter the way I thought it would. Because the truth is, my story was never meant to be loud. It wasn't made for headlines or toasts or applause. It was made to endure, to outlast misunderstanding, to quietly, steadily matter. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the heat to press into my skin. Long enough to stop needing to know what anyone else thought. When I got home, there was a letter in my mailbox. Handwritten. My mom's careful script on the envelope. I stood on the stoop holding it, unsure if I wanted to open it. Part of me thought it was just another plea to let it go. To come back to the fold. Pretend none of it happened. But it wasn't. Inside was a single page. No dramatic opening, no passive-aggressive barbs. Just this. Marina, I was wrong. I should have asked more questions. I should have listened better. You were always trying to show us who you were, and we were too busy mourning who we thought you should be. You didn't fail us. We failed you. Thank you for teaching us how to listen again. Love, Mom. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it neatly and pinned it to the corkboard above my workbench, right next to a blueprint of a foldable scooter ramp I'd been designing with one of our newer volunteers. That night, I didn't dream about rockets or Mars or what I could have been. I slept deeply, without noise, without apology. The auditorium wasn't big, one of those multipurpose halls at the community college that smells faintly of whiteboard cleaner and old carpet. Rows of metal folding chairs, a low stage, and a banner that read Regional Sustainability Fair, celebrating local innovation. The font was Comic Sans. I was the third speaker after a woman who ran a composting co-op and a guy with a hydroponic lettuce farm in his backyard. No press, no livestream, just a crowd of maybe 60 people, mostly older folks, a few grad students, and a dozen sleepy-looking high schoolers there for extra credit. Clara would have hated it. I stood backstage, hands in my pockets, watching the guy before me talk about nutrient flow and water filtration. He had a PowerPoint. I didn't bring slides. Just the truth. When they called my name, I stepped up and adjusted the mic. "Hi," I said. "I'm Marina Torres. I run a nonprofit called GEARGRANNY." There wasn't a flicker of recognition in the crowd. Not like there had been at the brunch when Adriana dropped the name. And that was okay. Better, even. "I used to be an aerospace engineer," I continued. "My last job involved propulsion systems for Mars vehicles. It was prestigious, high stress, impressive by most people's standards." I paused. "And I burned out. Quietly. Completely. One day I just couldn't go back." No gasps. No murmurs. Just a few people nodding. People who knew the weight of unraveling. "So I left," I said. "And for a while, I thought I had failed." I talked about Mrs. Wilkins and her vintage e-trike. About teaching seniors how to solder wires and troubleshoot battery packs. I told them about the mobile repair vans and the classes and the day we installed an electric cart ramp outside a senior center and 5 people cried because they hadn't been able to visit in weeks. I didn't tell them about my family, or the brunch, or the years of being the quiet disappointment. I didn't need to. I ended simply. "I used to think failure was the end of a story," I said. "But sometimes it's the beginning. What I have now, it's not glamorous. There's no headlines, no launch pads. But every week, someone moves again, gardens again, fixes something with their own hands again. And that's enough." Silence. Then someone stood. And then another. And then the room rose, a slow, sincere standing ovation that felt nothing like the hollow applause I used to chase. No one clapped because of what I used to be. They clapped because of what I do now. I smiled, not for validation, not for pride, for alignment. The kind you feel when your feet are steady on the ground, and your voice no longer shakes, and your name doesn't have to come with a footnote. Afterward, someone handed me a coffee in a compostable cup. Someone else asked if they could volunteer. It wasn't much, but it was real. And it was mine. It was a Thursday when I got Adriana's text. "Lunch? Just us. My treat. Promise no jazz brunch mimosas or linen dress codes." I sent back a thumbs up emoji. That was about all I had the energy for. We met at a tiny taqueria near the university, vinyl booths, handwritten signs, the kind of place where nobody cared what shoes you wore. Adriana showed up in jeans and a t-shirt that said "Science is for everyone." She had a notebook under one arm and a look in her eyes like she'd been waiting weeks to say something. "I owe you an apology," she said before we even ordered. I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything." "I do," she said. "Not for what happened at the brunch, but for how long I didn't know who you were. I've heard Clara mention you for years, and she never once said anything that even remotely hinted at what you've built. I feel like I've been walking around blind." I shrugged. "That's kind of been the family vibe." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. Then she opened her notebook and flipped to a page filled with bullet points and arrows. "So, I've been thinking," she said. "I work with the Beckwell Foundation. We fund women-led tech for good projects. Usually education, sustainability, healthcare. But I pitched them something different." I raised an eyebrow. "GEARGRANNY different?" She nodded. "Your model? It's scalable. You've already got volunteers, vans, curriculum. The demand is obvious. With the right infrastructure, you could expand statewide, maybe nationally." I blinked. "You pitched them? Without telling me?" She blushed. "I asked around first. I wanted to be sure. The board's interested. If you're open to it, they want a proposal. They can offer funding, logistics support, and introductions to regional health orgs. We'd start with a pilot in 3 cities. I sat back, the weight of her words taking a second to settle. I'd never imagined GEARGRANNY going beyond Albuquerque. I didn't even know if I wanted that. More logistics. More scrutiny. More everything. I don't know, I said carefully. This whole thing started because a trike wouldn't turn left. I didn't build it for scale. Adriana leaned in. But you built it to work. And that's why it should grow. Not because someone in a suit says it should, but because people need it. She paused. I'm not asking because you're Clara's sister. I'm asking because I believe in what you do. And I want to help. That was the difference. She wasn't offering charity. She wasn't looking for a box to check or a photo op. She was offering partnership. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I'm asking, she replied. We ordered tacos. We talked about logistics, grants, timelines. It was the kind of conversation I used to dread, too polished, too boardroom. But with Adriana, it didn't feel like that. It felt like two people building something real. By the time we left, I hadn't said yes. But I also hadn't said no. And for the first time in a long time, saying yes didn't feel like giving something away. It felt like possibility. The first Wheels of Dignity van rolled out of the GEARGRANNY lot 6 months later. White body, blue and gold logo on the side. Mobile repair unit with onboard 3D printer, adaptive device kits, and a collapsible workbench custom welded by one of our oldest volunteers, Ethel, 84 years old and still sharp with a blowtorch. We kicked off in Santa Fe, then Las Cruces, then Tucson. Local community centers signed on, and regional clinics sent referrals. Word spread fast. Seniors who hadn't left their homes in years started emailing us about scooters, chairs, retrofitted walkers, and, my personal favorite, a repurposed golf cart that now doubled as a mobile bookmobile for a 90-year-old retired librarian. One afternoon, tucked between 3 repair requests and a grant application draft, I opened an email from a sender I didn't recognize. The subject line read, I rode to my first art show in 40 years. Inside was a photo, an elderly woman in a wide-brimmed hat, grinning in front of a pastel seascape. Her scooter was parked beside her, decked out in blue LED lights and a basket with sunflowers painted on the side. You helped me get there, the message said. Thank you for remembering we still have things to do. That one made me cry. Not sobbing, just quiet tears. The kind you only shed when something deep inside finally exhales. The week of Clara and Adriana's wedding arrived, and with it, the usual stream of emails and texts, directions, seating plans, family group messages I still barely answered. The night before the wedding, I stood in my studio, staring at the closet. The dress I chose was silver. Sleek, understated, with sharp seams and a slit down the side. A soft shimmer to the fabric, but the kind of shimmer you had to get close to see. It was inspired by mechanics' coveralls, designed by a local seamstress who'd taken one look at my sawdust-splattered apron and said, let me make this into something that says don't underestimate her. I wore it with black boots. Because they're comfortable. And because I could. The wedding was a garden event, twinkling lights, live quartet, too many people with white teeth and wine flutes. I walked in without a trace of shame. Adriana's grandmother was there. I slipped a wrapped box to her when no one was looking. Open it later, I whispered. She winked. Inside was a custom toolkit. Sleek, labeled, Easy Grip. Engraved with her name and a little note, for fixing things that matter. There was no press there. No social media cameras. Just purpose. During the reception, my mom approached me with a glass of sparkling water. She looked at my dress, her lips parted like she wanted to say something critical. Then she smiled instead. A small, hesitant, real smile. This is my daughter, she said to the man beside her. The one who changes lives. I didn't say anything, just nodded. It was enough. Later that night, back at the studio, I pinned a quote above my workbench. Adriana had written it in my notebook weeks earlier during one of our planning calls. They'll call it failure until it changes their life. I read it one more time. Then I picked up my soldering iron and got back to work. Because legacy doesn't live in applause. It lives in action. And mine had only just begun.